All right, and with that we will. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody this evening to our presentation. Just bear with us as this is still new to us with this Zoom, so I hope everybody is able to follow along okay. Just to let you know, this meeting will be recorded for those who are unable to attend this evening, and it will be posted to our website, which is mvc.on.ca.
You muted yourself. We can't hear it.
Thank you, Eli. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, thank you very much for attending this evening. It is being recorded as unfortunately not everybody who signed up was able to attend. So that way it will be made available on our website, which is mvc.on.ca. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the chat or direct message option. We will be doing a Q&A at the end. So if you have any verbal comments or questions, we just ask that you hang on to those until the appropriate time. So I'm just going to run you through the agenda and what you can expect throughout this presentation. So we're here to talk about Bill 108 and how it pertains to the future of the Mill of Kintail Museum. We're also going to take a look at the recommendations put forth by the Special Advisory Committee, and there are 3 options there we'll take a look at. And we'll also discuss next steps and of course followed by the Q&A at the end. So just to introduce myself, my name is Shannon Gutowski. I'm the Community Relations Coordinator with MVCA, and I also oversee the site of the Mill of Kintail Conservation Area. Sally McIntyre, who is our General Manager, is also on the call with us. Stephanie Colsters, the Museum Curator and Site Supervisor at the Mill of Kintail, is on the line as well. Ross Ferguson, who is our Operations Supervisor, and Crystal Lowry, who wears many hats, as we all know, but this evening she is as the co-chair of the Special Advisory Committee. And at this time, I would like to ask Krista to just say a few words, please.
Sure, thanks Shannon. I did want to just take a minute or two and share with you the lens that the Special Advisory Committee used to do the work that that we have on this project. So as Shannon mentioned, I'm one of the co-chairs on the Special Advisory Committee. Councillor Jeff Atkinson from Carleton Place is the other co-chair. I've seen him on the list of participants this evening as well. We have an excellent advisory committee that's been working on this. Folks from the fundraising sector, from foundations, museum sector, community members, and I do want to thank them for their ongoing work and commitment to this process. Something the advisory committee understood from the outset of our discussions is the local significance of both our Tait McKenzie and Dr. James Naismith. The local elementary schools are named for both men. Mississippi Mills hosted a hometown Jurassic Park during the NBA Finals and celebrated Naismith's 158th birthday back in 2019 when we could celebrate together. The Volunteer was sculpted by our Tait McKenzie in memory of those lost to war, and it sits prominently beside the Old Town Hall in Elmwood. Known by some as the Brothers of the Wind, the advisory committee understands that McKenzie and Naismith were pioneers. They're cherished national historic figures and lifelong friends. We learned that McKenzie even served as the best man at Naismith's wedding. They attended McGill University, excelled in sports, and both became medical doctors. When Naismith left McGill and his position as the director of gymnastics, it was McKenzie who succeeded him and was instrumental in forming McGill's first basketball team in 1901, 10 years after Naismith had invented the game. Both Naismith and McKenzie were inaugural inductees into the McGill Sports Hall of Fame back in 1996. Throughout the work of the Special Advisory Committee, we've made new friends at Canada's Walk of Fame, NBA Canada, the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, and at Springfield College, and we are excited about the potential partnerships that may unfold. First, the playground and birthplace of this epic brotherhood, later the summer home of McKenzie. A more suitable location could not be chosen as a tribute to our Tait McKenzie and Dr. Naismith than the Mill of Kintail. Their own roots run so deeply in this site and in the community. The Special Advisory Committee has identified 3 potential options for the future of the museum. All options keep the museum and the collections on site at the Mill of Kintail Conservation Area. From the beginning of our discussions, the Special Advisory Committee approached the future of the museum and these two collections as an opportunity. The Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority, the staff, and the many dedicated volunteers have for years been a steady steward of this legacy. As a committee, we asked ourselves, how do we step into this next chapter? How do we ensure the museum truly thrives? And in the options that will be presented to you tonight, we believe we are doing just that. Thank you very much for participating, and I'll pass it back to you, Shannon.
All right, thank you very much, Krista. Greatly appreciated. So we're just going to move on to the next slide here. I first want to start this presentation with telling you a little bit about Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority, who we are and what we do. We were established in 1968, and we have a very large jurisdiction. So it starts at Mazenau Lake at Bon Echo Provincial Park in the west and goes all the way to the Ottawa River at Fitzroy Harbor in the east. The Carp River is also part of our watershed, and we have 11 member municipalities, 17 board members, and 27 staff as well. So a little bit about our boots on the ground work. We are responsible for the conservation and management of natural resources in the watershed. We do education, stewardship, development review and approvals, flood forecasting and warning, dam operations, and conservation area management as well. One thing I wanted to bring your attention right off the bat is there's a lot of moving pieces here and perhaps some confusion. So I just want to try and nip this in the bud right off the beginning. So when we talk about the mill, the site, we're talking about the Mill of Kintail conservation area proper. So that's the 150-acre property with the half basketball court, the playground, the facility rentals, the weddings, and of course the great hiking trails that so many of you enjoy. When referencing the museum, we're talking about the actual structure, the 3-story building located on the site. And when we're talking about the collections, we are talking about the McKenzie and Naismith collections, as well as programming. So let's talk a little bit about why we're here this evening. And it all started back in June 2019, when Bill 108 forced all 36 conservation authorities in the province to examine current activities. We were specifically told by Minister Urick, the Minister of Environment, Parks and Conservation, that we were required to start winding down programs that were not deemed mandatory under the new regulations. And we were given a transition period of 18 to 24 months. So that was back in 2019. We still haven't received the regulations yet, but there's every indication that we will be receiving them shortly, and the transition period hasn't changed. So essentially that means in 2022, only core programs can be funded from the municipal levy. So MVCA did our due diligence, and we investigated our programs and services to determine which would be mandatory and which ones wouldn't. So it was determined that the museum operating with the collections would no longer be deemed core under this new legislation. Museum revenues come from the municipal levy is 60%, or about $100,000. And that same year in 2019, provincial funding was reduced for MVCA as well to just 2% from the province for the entire operation of the Conservation Authority. So let's take a look at the current state of the museum and the collections. So MVCA has owned and operated the Mill of Kintail Museum since 1972. We know that the museum and the collections, they represent a significant local, national, historical culture as well. And we know that it's a physical link to the past. As Krista mentioned, there's some great history there, and we're very fortunate to have that in our community. On a normal year, and I say normal, pre-COVID, attendance is about 8,000 people to the museum per season. On a normal year, it's open 7 days a week through the operating season, which is May to October. However, due to COVID, last year we operated 4 days a week from Friday to Monday, and we are anticipating doing the 4 days a week again this year. We are hopeful that the stay-at-home order will be lifted May 20th, and that we can open the museum as per usual the May 2-4 weekend. So there is no cost to get into the museum. There is a cost to get onto the site though. So it's $6 per vehicle per day, or an annual pass of $47 per vehicle. So I want to get into the cost right now of what it costs to have the museum run. And that's about $134,000 a year. And that includes your compensation and non-compensation, as well as major and minor capital costs. So I'm just going to break that down a little bit just to put it into perspective. So the non-compensation is your lights on and maintaining the integrity of the building. That's $23,000 a year on average. And that's your heat, your hydro, your phone, and your taxes. Compensation is staff salary, and that's one full-time employee, seasonal and other MVCA staff, and that equals about $101,000 per year. Your minor capital is $2,500 on average per year, and that's your painting, refurbishing of floors, etc. And then the major capital is $7,800 average per year over 10 years, and that's your furnace, your septic, the fire escape, the roof, that kind of thing. But there's also the revenue sources, which is approximately $28,000 in grants. And those grants come from CMOG, which is the Canadian Museum Operating Grant. That's about $13,000 per year. A grant from the Mississippi Mills, the municipality Mississippi Mills at $11,000, as well as $4,000 from various funding opportunities through the province and the federal government for summer students. And as I mentioned, the municipal levy is about $100,000 as well. With the collection, it's currently insured at just under $5.3 million. Definitely a significant asset to MVCA and the community. So we're just going to take a look at the timeline now. In fall 2019, the Board of Directors approved a 5-year museum strategic plan. And it was also that time back in the fall that the Special Advisory Committee was struck. And as Krista said, it was a great wealth of knowledge that joined the committee. So we were very, very fortunate to have those experts guide us through this. And as Krista mentioned, the purpose of the committee was to essentially look at different funding and service delivery models to meet and to provide advice to MVCA and to facilitate implementation of the museum's new direction as approved by the Board of Directors. And as Krista mentioned, they heard loud and clear from the public that they wanted the collections to stay on site at the Mill of Kintail Conservation Area, and the recommendations certainly reflect that. So from November 2019 to December 2020, the committee held 4 meetings, and then COVID hit. So it was difficult to progress because of COVID, as key funders and regulators obviously had a lot on their plates, and some conversations were stalled. However, the committee really did their work and did a lot of work behind the scenes. So you know, they met with potential funders and had those conversations, and Krista did list some of those conversations or communications that happened throughout that time. Another thing that the committee wanted certain clarity on was ownership of the McKenzie collection. So MVCA did seek legal counsel, and in December 2020 received a court order confirming that the McKenzie collection was outright owned by MVCA with no trust associated with it. And it's also important to note that in 2018, the Naismith Foundation transferred ownership of the collection, of the Naismith collection, to MVCA. So that brings us to present day of 2021. Again, we were anticipating that the regulations would still be implemented in 2022. So that's why it was very important for the committee to reconvene. And as mentioned, they did that, and they came up with their 3 recommendations. That was taken to the Board of Directors at actually last week's meeting. The board approved those special recommendations and directed staff to carry out public consultation, which is what we're doing this evening, and to further investigate the viability of options. So we're going to take a look at those recommendations right now. As Krista mentioned, all 3 certainly reflect keeping the collections on site at the Mill of Kintail Conservation Area. So option A is ownership transferred to another existing organization. So that MVCA seeks a suitable existing organization to assume ownership and management of the Dr. Tait McKenzie and Dr. James Naismith collections with transitional funding provided by MVCA. So while it keeps the collection at the site, there is an unknown time frame. We don't know how long it's going to take to secure that other existing organization. And there's still the risk or the opportunity that there's some future changes which may impact the new organization. So moving on to option B, MVCA retains ownership of the collections and obtains operating and maintenance funding via a memoranda of understanding with member municipalities, and to leverage the Mississippi Valley Conservation Foundation for fundraising efforts. So again, the collection stays on site. However, this does require support of 11 municipalities, and it's 11 because that's who our board is made up of, or 11 member municipalities. However, if it stays, if we go with option B, MVCA can continue to co-promote the museum, the collections, and the site as a whole. However, there is some instability with the funding, as an MOU is only valid for one term of council or 4 years. So this would have to be revisited every 4 years. Additionally, the foundation is not a strong fundraising body and are currently in transition. So option C is a new museum corporation, and ownership and future management of the collections would be assumed by a new museum not-for-profit or other legal entity. So MVCA would request a 5-year regulatory exemption from the provincial government on the grounds that the collections are of national significance, and in order to secure transitional funding, allow for the formation of a new museum board and for the new organization to evolve into an independently funded entity. So in order to establish this board, the board needs their own governance structure, not-for-profit charitable status. The likelihood of a provincial exemption is unknown, and it would require significant community commitment to establish and participate in this new board. And that would take a considerable amount of time for sure. So for next steps, April 2021, public review, as I said, we're doing now, and we have the commenting period open until May 7th. Spring, summer of 2021, MVCA staff will continue to investigate the recommended options and report back to the Policy and Priorities Committee, as well as the Board of Directors with findings and recommendations. And we are hopeful that the regulations will be released before the board tables a decision, but we are looking to implement their decision as approved summer into towards the end of the year. So with that, we come to our question, our Q&A portion. I hope I went slow enough for everybody to understand. I apologize if I didn't. So for the questions, I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there. So first of all, if you don't feel comfortable speaking or leaving a comment on the chat, my email address is up there. So I certainly encourage you to send me a message if that's the case. Otherwise, we're going to open it up. I'm just going to go to Mord. So what we're going to do is we're going to raise the hand, and I'm just trying to see how to do that for you. And I can't figure that out right now with me sharing the screen. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And at the bottom of your screen, you should have a reactions, and you'll just click on that and you'll see a raise hand. So we just ask that you do that. And we'll also ask, again, as an option to write it in a chat as well. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand on your Zoom, not your physical hand. And Sally, I'll turn that over to you.
Right.
Sorry, can I just jump in just to give you a heads up in terms if you click on the participants at the bottom and click on it, it'll come up and show all the participants, but then that's where you can raise your hand.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then when you're wanting to lower your hand, you just click on that raise hand again.
Okay, so I am going to start to, I'm looking at questions coming in over the chat line. So the first one is whether or not we can share a copy of the court order, and absolutely we can post that to our website, and we'll do that first thing tomorrow. So we'll get that out there for everybody to see what the court had ordered. The second question was wondering whether or not an exemption would also be required for option 2, which is where the MVCA would retain ownership and management of the collection. And Shannon, if you want to start that answer, and I can pick up as needed.
Sure, just so I understand, so an exemption to
the minister?
To the minister. It certainly could be explored. However, I don't know if that would be necessary if we go with option B and there is the commitment from the municipalities.
That's right. I mean, as long as municipalities within the watershed are interested in continuing to support funding and maintenance of the collection with MVCA, then no exemption would be required, because we'd have memorandum of understanding that would provide for funding and continuance of the museum at the MVCA. So it really would depend on whether or not full funding or only partial funding were received from those municipalities. And if there was a funding gap, then perhaps we might need an exemption where for a fixed period of time, the province would allow us to fund the difference through the municipal levy. I'm just going to go over to see if I see any hands raised.
And I'll also post the this presentation online as well, so you'll be able to get that as well.
Okay, I've just scrolled through all 76 participants. I don't see any other questions raised. So in the chat, the question was whether or not our employee Stephanie was consulted at all about the options. And of course, Stephanie as an employee has been involved throughout the process. She didn't sit on the committee, but obviously we depend on her enormously to provide us with information to help inform the decisions, and she provides a valuable input to this entire process. The next question is, if item 2 is the result, then I suggest that this information gets out to the 11 municipalities ASAP so that they can get it on their council agendas right away. My experience tells me that their agendas are already quite full, and it will take a long time before there is a vote in order to support financially the museum. So on that note, as Shannon mentioned, the next step is really to go out and I guess test the validity and the viability of those 3 options. And if one of those options plays out, for instance, option A, then the need to pursue options B and C are lessened, obviously. But if we feel that there is not going to be a ready existing organization to assume ownership of the collection, then you're right, absolutely, we need to get out to those municipalities as soon as possible. And in fact, that's why we're moving forward with this right now. So it says, what property would be transferred to the museum should there be creation of a new organization? Would it just be the building, or would there be negotiation? So further to what Shannon said at the beginning, you need to think of the collection as separate from the building. The building is part of the conservation area and is owned by MVCA, separate in part from the collection. So what we're really talking about here this evening is what happens to the collection and where and how is it displayed and by whom. So there would be no transfer of land associated with the collection. We're just talking about the collection and the programming associated with that collection. Have other conservation authorities with heritage resources been consulted about what they are doing? So maybe Shannon, I can turn that to you because you have a better handle on that.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Sally. So while we're part of a province-wide network, each conservation authority does operate differently. So Yes, I've reached out to other conservation authorities in the same boat just to see what they're doing, and it very much varies. For example, a conservation authority down in Hamilton, they do have a museum. However, when the conservation authority took over the museum, there was a purchase agreement with the city of Hamilton, and the city of Hamilton is essentially providing funding for the museum each year. So this doesn't really affect them in that vein. There's another O'Hara Mill over in Crow Valley in Madoc. Their heritage area is run by a Friends of. Rockland Conservation Area down in Southern Ontario, their municipal levy does not pay for the museum. It is volunteer run, a volunteer curator. There's another heritage area in Long Point Conservation Authority. Right now, they're just kind of taking a wait and see approach. And there's another conservation authority down in Lower Thames, Chatham-Kent area, where they do run a museum, and they do have full support of their member municipalities. So it's hard because we're not all in the same boat. Each municipality and each conservation authority is different. So we're not comparing apples to apples here.
Shannon, could you also comment on the nature of those museums? Because if I'm not mistaken, we're relatively unique in having, you know, a nationally significant art exhibit, right? I don't think the other ones are quite the same in their nature.
Exactly, they're more heritage sites. So for example, if you picture Black Creek Pioneer Village in Toronto, I think that's very much a well-known one. So the other ones I mentioned are more or less like this. We are certainly unique in that, you know, we have this amazing collection of local, national, international significance. So it is hard to kind of maneuver our way through this because there is no set guideline or help from other conservation authorities, unfortunately. But yeah, we are unique and we're proud of that, right?
So the next question I see here is, has Ottawa, and I'm assuming that means the city of Ottawa as opposed to the feds, been asked about what its position is with regard to the museum? So we haven't asked any of the municipalities within our jurisdiction to render any sort of position on this until we've fleshed out the options and you know, what the viability is out there of moving away from MVCA owning and operating it going forward. Because the direction from the ministry was quite clear. That they wanted us to move away from the operation of these types of facilities. If you meant federally as well, the same applies. But we have reached out to funders at the federal level to determine whether or not there's opportunities there. Would there be the opportunity for a new or transitional organization to rent the current museum building space to allow for continued use? And I would say, yes, that's very much along the lines of perhaps option 3. You know, if there is not an organization that clearly comes forward and says, you know, they have the capacity and wherewithal to assume ownership and management of the collection, then, you know, we would be in some sort of transition phase. And that's a distinct possibility. Since most of the existing funding comes from the municipal levy, what opportunities are there for a new museum to do fundraising? Can use of the site and building be negotiated with MVCA for other, sorry, it's scrolling up, which is why I keep on getting disjointed here, for other fundraising? So the short answer is yes. You know, we're looking at the different options, but we really need to, at this point, because the time is of the essence, to really get down to, I'll call it brass tacks. We need to deal with real tangible solutions. You know, if there are groups of people that want to assemble and put together, you know, proposals, so to speak, I encourage you to do so. But at this point, you know, we really need to be moving forward with credible, viable solutions, because we're going to have to start down that road of putting these various measures in place to enable that transition very soon. Is the MVCA committed to fund maintenance of the building? Absolutely, the building is our asset. And I think one of the questions that we would need to discuss with any group that would want to continue use of the building for the purpose of operating a museum there would be what sort of cost sharing arrangement would there be? And there's no hard and fast decision on that yet. And that would be up for the MVCA board to negotiate and make a determination on. In consideration of the capacity of the Conservation Foundation, has consideration been of reestablishing the Friends of the Mill of Kintail with a sole funding engagement focus on the museum and collection? Frankly, no. The reason being is because to the degree that we disaggregate and parse out our resources to smaller entities really limits our ability to do fundraising as a whole for the Conservation Authority and across our portfolio. Part of the challenge we have with the foundation right now is that it doesn't have the resources needed to do effective fundraising. And I'm sure many of you on the call who have done work for nonprofits and doing fundraising, you need to spend money to raise money. It takes people and resources. And this is what we're looking at, is how can the foundation as an organization work more effectively so that it is able to raise more funds, not just potentially for the museum, but across our operations as the authority. And in particular, what I'd speak to is that because the legislation now states that certain activities, not just this museum, but other activities of the authority are no longer considered mandatory, we need to give consideration to whether those programs continue and whether they need to be, benefit from the fundraising of that foundation. And those activities may be much more closely aligned to our core mandate than this museum, for example. So, for instance, tree planting programs, stewardship initiatives, with landowners in the municipalities. If only some of the municipalities agree to support the museum, could the museum carry on at a level proportional to funding pledged in MOU? I think that's a distinct possibility.
So much more to support.
Sorry, can people mute? Because I'm hearing some background noise. As I was saying, not dissimilarly to what we've done under COVID-19, where we've adapted, quite frankly, to the circumstances that we've all been faced with. I think it's reasonable to assume that on a go-forward basis, if finances only allow them to be open, a shorter amount of time, in terms of the season or shorter hours, that's something that would be examined either by MVCA if we retain it and continue to operate it, or by any other entity. Would MVCA also fund the storage of the collection in the gatehouse where it is presently? So just for some of you who don't know, there's the museum that you saw in the photographs there, the old mill building where everything is displayed. But then we also have at the gatehouse off the parking lot, a building where in the basement we have an area that's been designed to safely hold items that we're not able to display. And so that would be something else that we could discuss and negotiate with whomever takes over the collection, if a third party does take over the collection. Oh, I skipped over a question concerning Mississippi Mills Council. Sorry, I didn't see it. So let me just scroll back up, because maybe that, what is the position of the Mississippi Mills Council in providing more funding to keep these alive, similar to what they provided in past textile museum? So Krista, I don't know if you feel comfortable responding to that at this time.
Yeah, sure. I can provide a response. So the council doesn't have a hard and firm position at this point. Excuse me. As I think many of you probably know who are on the call today, there's a formula that the municipality uses to assign funding to the 4 museums that are in the municipality. It was discussed last budget cycle, so for this year, for 2021, that we expect there would be a discussion based on what happens at the MVCA, that formula would need to be recalibrated, you could say. We would need to change how that formula works as the management and ownership of the Kintail Museum changes. So there hasn't been a decision there yet, but there has been an acknowledgement that things will change in the future. And I could also add last year, or was it the year before? I can't remember. It all kind of blends together, 2020. I guess it was maybe about this time last year. The municipality did pass a resolution of support to assist the Conservation Authority with setting up the legalities if that was something that ended up needing to happen. And that was in recognition that it is an important museum and 2 important collections in our municipality. So we did offer that sort of in-kind support. We're not at a position yet to be diving into that, but should the Conservation Authority need that support, the Council of Mississippi Mills has offered to help out in that way. So hopefully that answers okay.
Great, thank you, Krista. So the next question is, what sort of partnership would the museum see under a new organization with the MVCA? Could the new museum partner with the MVCA on an outdoor exhibition on the grounds, as an example? How closely could they work together? So without getting into specifics, I think that MVCA is interested in maintaining the museum at this site and working with whomever is managing that collection to promote the collection and potentially other events at the site. You know, we want to attract people to the site. It's a beautiful site. But anytime, you know, we're planning those sorts of things, we do so with care and forethought. As some of you may know, the site is also used for weddings and the like. So we need to be cognizant of the full range of uses on the site. And therefore, I'm not in a position to say definitively that we'd agree to, you know, a full range of outdoor activities. These are the sorts of things that, you know, we could have discussions regarding at the time of the signing of transfer of ownership or under any sort of lease agreements and that sort of thing.
Do have a hand from Shane.
Okay, Shane, I can, if you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I guess this sort of follows up on the last question that you just read and responded to. But I mean, I've worked with the Carlton Place and Beckwith Heritage Museum as a volunteer for a while, so I kind of know how small museums work. And certainly when the news of the province's decision with regard to the Conservation Authority came out, that you know, quite stunned me when it the thought of what might happen to the Mill of Kintail, because I do see it as sort of a local, a provincial and a national gem and resource. And it's very important, I think, that full scope, you know, be explored. I guess I'm a little concerned, you know, you sort of say, well, you know, we're talking about the collection here and the use of the building. But if the best sort of use of the site and the building were, you know what, and this may sound odd, and I don't want to offend anybody from the North Lanark Museum, but I attended a session a couple of years ago where they were talking about sort of how public is engaged. And at one point, there was an exercise where they talked about the North Lanark Museum outside of Appleton, say, well, you know, what about if it moved? And what about if it moved to Pakenham? And of course, for those of us who grew up with the Appleton Museum, moving it to Pakenham seems outrageous. But you know, it seemed people who were involved at the time didn't seem that, because they thought, well, you know, we could do more traffic. We would be in the north end of the Lanark. We'd be serving. We'd be engaging a huge number of people, you know, because of Pakenham's natural attraction. I'm just wondering that if the museum and the building will remain, and someone were to take over operation, and they said, you know what, we really need to build another building. Like, we need a building, an archive building. We need, how open would the Conservation Authority be to that sort of thing? I mean, I know it may seem premature now, but that's where my mind is going, because, you know, we're dealing with COVID now, we're dealing with the issues, but 20 years from now, where is it going to be? And I mean, I don't want to see it moved from the spot. When I visit it, I find it's one of the most impressive museums and sites. The artwork, the site, the feeling that this is where the work was done, you know, I think is, you know, quite astounding. And I think a lot of people take that away when they, you know, when they're on site and when they've left. And it's unfortunately not well known. I mean, you can't, so I can see that if we're going to promote it, if you're going to get another heritage organization involved, whether it's a current one or whether it's a new one, and they're going to say, how do we create this and make this sustainable? It may not be sustainable sort of by itself. If the Conservation Authority is using part of the site to run weddings, I know a lot of small museums are doing that now. Like, that's how they fund. Even our small museum, when people are allowed to meet, we have the Foss room that we rent out at a very small amount. But of course, that all goes to the revenues of the museum. And as I say, I think that, as I say, there may be a lot of here. I just don't think that whatever the move is, that it should be handcuffed into saying, well, we're talking about the collection and the renting the building. Because, as I say, 10 years from now, people are going to say, what are we doing? Like, have we got an archive? What are we? And as I say, if it were something like the North Lanark Regional Museum said, oh, you know what? We could take it over and take our collection there, but where do we put it? That would be a very interesting discussion. I'm not saying anyone is having those discussions or perhaps should, but it does seem to me that that may be, you know, one of the ways that this would be approached. And certainly when you come back to Lanark County and say, okay, you know, the Lanark County government, so okay, this is a Lanark County site. Like, how much do you promote it now, and how do we get this? Because, as I say, I think the site is unique. I think it's incredibly valuable. I know I've done a lot of research, sort of, and I tell you, there are people out there who would snap this collection up.
Yeah, okay, so Shane, I'm gonna have to stop you there. and I appreciate.
You don't have to, but I'll let you.
Well, in the interest of letting other people also speak and answering questions. So you've covered a lot, and so let me try to start to answer, and Shannon, you can add in as you see as well. So, you know, it's interesting you raised the question about, or the example of the North Lanark Museum. And I think one of the things that all the small museums are dealing with is, you know, the challenge of operating standalone unique sites and managing those collections and doing the fundraising and all of these things as independent entities. And right from the get-go, quite frankly, one of the conversations we've had is there an opportunity at the county level to, you know, look at co-management of some of these collections and consolidation of some of these sites. Frankly, we didn't get a whole lot of uptake to that concept, but I do think that that's an option that all of the museums need to be looking at going forward, including whoever takes ownership of this collection, which could potentially still be MVCA if the municipalities, all 11 municipalities or a sufficient number of municipalities are willing to continue to fund it. So I think, you know, the concept that you raise and the questions you pose are entirely valid. In terms of handcuffing the potential partner organization who would assume this ownership and management of the collection, I'd like to think that as we, you know, pursue the discussions, that we can have these conversations about what the opportunities are. some people may be familiar that the Mill and Kintail actually has a master plan that was developed many, many years ago now, and is in all likelihood due for an update. And as part of that update, conceivably, we could explore these kind of things. But as you can appreciate, as the owner of a very large site that has many purposes and activities on it, we wouldn't want to just say, yes, you know, we're a corporation, we have own multiple sites, we have various assets, we need to manage them responsibly. And so the question posed to us, we would need to give due consideration. And I'd like to assure you, we would not just, you know, dismiss it out of hand. That would not be something we would do, because we do view ourselves as, first of all, a very long-term owner of that collection and manager and of the collection. And as you say, myself, you know, when I went in there many, many years before ever becoming the general manager here, I loved it, you know, and I've gone to any number of art exhibits that we host at that site as well over the years. So I think anybody who's visited in this museum shares exactly the sentiment that you have shared with us this evening. So I would like to, you know, assure people that we want that to remain the case as well. We're just sort of trying to operate within this legislative box, though, and in the absence of the regulations, we're not sure, you know, how big or small that box is. And until we're able to suss out, you know, the true validity and viability of some of these options that have been put forward by the Special Advisory Committee, where some of the questions being posed tonight are very specific down a certain way. And we need to actually figure out, do we even have a viable partner to be engaging in those kind of conversations with? So I hope that helps to respond to some of the questions you posed and comments you made. Shannon, is there anything you would like to add to that?
No, I don't think so. I think I covered it well, Sally.
Okay. So I'm going to go back over to the chat. Okay, do you feel there is a possibility that the province might not go through with cancellation of funding for the museum, given that despite the timeline, they have not given specifics? Excellent question. So here's the thing is right now we are still waiting for the regulations. Bill 108 was passed in June 2019 and we still haven't received the regulations. There is still the potential that those regulations could be written in a manner that would allow for funding of this museum. But that would take a tremendous effort on behalf of the museum sector to engage with the province to make that happen. To the best of my knowledge, the regulations as drafted, and let me assure you, this is only rumor mill because we have not officially been, well, unofficially or officially received any sort of draft regulations to comment on. So, but from what I'm given to understand, the regulations do not provide for the municipal levy to fund this museum effective, you know, implementation of that regulation. So if the collective of museums affected by Bill 108 see an opportunity to lobby the government very intensely right now, you still have a window to do so. As well, depending on the period that they allow for consultation on the regulation, and it could be 30, 60, or 90 days, you could do a full core press, you know, lobbying effort during that period of time as well, to try to influence the final regulation. So, but as things stand right now, I do not personally see that as a likelihood, unless there is that concerted, very public, very coordinated lobby effort of the provincial government. Could the idea that Shane raises be considered an option for all three Mississippi Mills museums to be combined to streamline funding, grant applications, and volunteer network? Well, at a personal level, yes, I think it's an absolute idea. And as I mentioned, I certainly see at the county level, there's an opportunity there. I don't know whether, Krista, if I'm putting you on the spot as warden, if you have any thoughts on that idea.
I don't actually have any thoughts on that as far as the county piece goes. It's not a discussion that's happened before. It's
Okay.
not to say it's a discussion that couldn't happen because, you know, like we've said a couple times already this evening, a lot of the small museums are in the same boat of, you know, not necessarily having all of the resources that they need to do all the things that they're wanting to do. So it certainly could be a discussion there. I'm not sure if there would be uptake or not, but it could happen. It could absolutely happen. I'm just looking, it was Lucy's question, right? About
Yes.
3 museums. That's definitely something that could happen. It's not, I guess the tricky part is it can't be the Conservation Authority or Lanark County or Mississippi Mills as a municipality that says, you know, museums, you guys need to do this or this or this. So it's conversations that have to involve quite a lot of parties to see something like that come forward. And it might be a great option, like might be a really great option and really great opportunity. But it wouldn't be for the MVCA to indicate that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Krista. And I agree with you. Like one of the challenges we have is each of those museums have their own boards and governance and the like. And so it would really be that those individual organizations would need to get together and have those conversations. And then if they wanted the support and, you know, and to engage the MVCA and the county and the local municipality, then great, they could do that. But I think there would have to be a coming of minds of those 3 organizations first. They would have to demonstrate that they want to pursue this and then ask for assistance in, you know, making that happen. Okay, so.
We do have a hand up and
Okay.
just owner.
Okay, so you can unmute yourself.
It's Valerie Wilkins. I don't know if that hand up is mine or not.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. I just really like Shane's thinking, that he's thinking on a broad spectrum. And what occurred to me about this whole thing, and I think the committee's done a great job, is because it's all focusing on preserving the Mill of Kintail, but there's 11 museums, and I go back to marketing, I guess, from a business point of view, and the whole idea of consensus from different museums. Are you looking at working together? I know that the Mill of Kintail's got a specific problem right now, but do the museums work at marketing together, because that could help fund with the Mill of Kintail? And I'm going to bring in Ottawa here from the point of view of tourism. Does this area work with Ottawa to bring tourism into this area? Because I know we have lots of people from Ottawa come to Almont area, but to bring in outside tourism to Ottawa. And I'm throwing that out just as a general comment, because I don't know how cohesive a group we are in working as a whole.
Mm-hmm. I'll start to bit of a response to that, and then Shannon, if you could pick up where I leave off. So in terms of Ottawa tourism and the relationship between this area and the city of Ottawa, absolutely. I know that Ottawa tourism, I've actually done work with them, you know, looks at the greater Ottawa area as a catchment area. Mm-hmm. I would have to say that we haven't reached out to Ottawa tourism specifically on this issue. Mm-hmm. I would see that as a possibility. The degree to which this site is pulling people from further afield into this area, mm-hmm. The analysis we did back in 2019, and this is Shannon, where I think I'll ask you to help to flesh out my response, seemed to indicate that we pull people from Eastern Ontario to this neck of the woods, mm-hmm. but I don't know that we could argue based upon data that we're pulling things into City of Ottawa proper. Yeah. But Shannon, maybe you could pick up on that.
Exactly, like we do, there is a log at the museum where people can choose to sign in, put their names and where they're from. So we did do an analysis of that, and it's the majority is local. So Mississippi Mills,
Yeah.
and that's including specifically Pakenham, Almont, Perth, Iron Prior seems to be some other significant visitor numbers. City of Ottawa certainly is there, but it certainly is not, not the top three.
Because I think that's a missed opportunity, to be honest, if that's a target market to bring in revenue, period.
Sorry, could you just elaborate what you mean? It's a missed opportunity for us to market to the city of Ottawa in terms of.
Well, Ottawa itself is a tourist destination, right? And I think if we worked with the city as far as a tourism, like come to Almont. Almont is the top 10 place to retire to. It's known across Canada. And we work with the city of Ottawa to be on their sites about coming to Almont, a day trip to Almont. And it could include the Mill of Kintail, the mills in Lanark. I mean, it's a lovely day trip. It would bring in money to the rest of the town in other areas. But I moved here a year and a half ago, and from Ottawa, Canada area, and I suspected something wasn't happening. And I see the Mill of Kintail. It is a wonderful location, as is our textile museum, and then further out to Lanark. And I just think, thinking in a broader picture, like Shane is trying to express, I think.
Right. So
it's not going to solve the Mill of Kintail's problem immediately, but it could be an answer to the general area down the road.
Right. So I do know that the Mill of Kintail is Shannon, how's it referred to as one of Lanark's?
Seven Wonders of Lanark County.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
It's a gem.
Yes, and so it is marketed in the county, at the county level, as one of the seven wonders of the county.
And we have 13,000 people, at least in the Mississippi Mills. That's not a big draw.
So I think that, there's always that opportunity to promote more and to attract more people. But those kind of revenues, Shannon spoke at the very beginning about our revenue stream, and we don't actually even charge at the museum, right? We charge at the gate to access the site. So there are no revenues associated per se with attendance at the museum. They go to the site and the museum shares in that. So anyway, I'm going to go back over to the chat. So thank you very much for that question and your comments. So a comment is made, the building will fall apart if the MVC doesn't continue to pay for the maintenance utilities. This means the cost of running the museum is mainly staffing. So that's correct. I mean, if we want to maintain that building in a condition that it can be used, there are some base costs that we would need to incur. On that, some of those costs, definitely if we temporarily close the building, those costs would be reduced. But to have it as an occupied and used space costs more. And those are the sorts of discussions we would have to have. But there's full understanding that if we want to maintain the integrity of that building as a historic site and one that withstands the test of time, we've invested a lot of money in that building over the time. It has that fire escape that was recently done. We just built a retaining wall. So we're constantly putting improvements into that building. So I don't think there's any intention of the board to see that building go into decline. So that's not a question here. It's that, as an occupant coming into that building as a museum, what would be the cost sharing? We're not saying it's 100%. We're not saying it's zero. We need to figure that out. Men Ling has his hand up. Did Is
It's
that
Nick Manling here. I'd like to.
okay? Yes,
like-
go ahead.
Yes. I'd like to further the discussion to bring the Kintail back into the fold. I believe in your master plan, the operation of a museum is not included. To me, the simple, if there's the will, then the simple answer would be to alter the master plan to include the Kintail. And from then, it's up to us to develop the critical mass of people to continue to run it. But without it being included in the MVCA master plan, we're not going to go ahead and do anything.
So just to clarify, and as I sit here right now, I'd have to go online and look at our master plan to see, but I'm pretty sure the master plan was done after we assumed that collection and we're running the museum. So I'm 95% sure the museum is in our master plan. What's at issue here is that under the new legislation, the municipal levy, which is the bulk of our funding as an organization, comes from the municipal levy. And that levy under the new legislation cannot be applied to this museum. So it creates a significant funding gap. The legislation also says that if we want to ask those municipalities to continue to fund it, that's not a decision of the board per se. The board can make a recommendation and say, okay, member municipalities, we would like you to continue funding it. But the legislation says that I need to go and negotiate with each one of those 11 municipalities and have each one of those councils agree to fund this museum. And so I hope people can appreciate that, going to, the far reaches of this watershed to even smaller municipalities than Mississippi Mills, right? Mississippi Mills is a bedroom community of Ottawa, and in the scheme of things within our watershed is actually quite populous and has a lot of tax dollars compared to, as you move up the watershed, they have less and less resources. Mm-hmm. So I can anticipate that, not necessarily all municipalities would feel comfortable allocating funds to this site when they may have their own museums and budgetary pressures in their jurisdiction that they would feel more comfortable supporting with those dollars that are currently going into this museum. And so it's a matter of going to all of those municipalities and seeing which ones would be willing to continue to fund. And as Shannon said previously, that memorandum of understanding has to get signed every 4 years. It's only good for 4 years. So every term of council, we'd be back to this position, asking those councils to renew their commitment. So it's an option, but it's not a very secure one, if I could say. Every 4 years, we'd be back in this boat again.
Yeah.
I see Valerie's hand up. If you want to unmute yourself, Valerie.
I already spoke.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I saw your hand up.
I did, and it was the unknown person, and I thought maybe it was me. So sorry.
Okay.
Actually, my name is Valerie as well.
Okay, pardon me.
I'm really well known as Val, so if you call me Val, that'll help.
Please go for it, Val.
Okay, so I was on the council for Mississippi Mills for 15 years, and I was at the Conservation Authority for 7. And during that time, I became very aware and involved with all of this. So there's a couple of questions I have, and I want to say something in response to someone else's question. So regarding the question of whether the Mississippi Mills museums in particular would work together as a group, this is something we worked very hard with in the past. We tried very hard to do that. And the result of that was the unification of 2. And those were the museums belonging to the 2 young men who grew up together and were associated. This felt like a huge achievement at the time. Now, what we found with the other museums is they are very independent and have very much their own way of working, and were not very interested because, and certainly if you look at the Textile Museum, it is such a more national status, and it has higher quality grants, more money. It's on a little bit of a different level and process. So, and of course, Lanark Museum is kind of the other direction. So very hard to get them. This is the answer to the question asked by one of your other attendees. So I just want to speak to that because it's something we have worked on. I also, in listening to all of this, one thing that's really so significant and was such a big achievement was getting those museums in the building in the Ramsey area where they came from. Everybody talks about Naismith coming from Almont. Of course, he doesn't actually. He was really from Ramsey, and this took them back to the place. And they're in this very special environmental location. So to me, any talk of taking the collections away from that site, I find quite disappointing, and it would be destructive of all the previous efforts of getting in that site. So bearing that in mind, I would say the effort would be, how can you retain the site with the building in it? And my other questions following that would be, would the Conservation Authority want to keep that site if another provincial body or other level of government were to be prepared to take it over and launch it perhaps more at a higher level, as Valerie was already talking about? Would the Conservation Authority, I mean, they don't have their offices there. Their offices are on the county highway. So the question is, how would they respond to someone taking over the whole thing? And the other question is, what does Lanark County, since Lanark County represents all of the municipalities, and this is a jewel in the middle of Lanark County, how would Lanark County respond to being a bigger partner or even responsible for getting some of those achievements through, like, because once it becomes a county thing, it becomes county advertised, county-wide advertised, and so on. So those would be my two big questions that hang over some of this. And I think to go to Mississippi Mills, they have always had difficulty raising funds just for the museums they have. So to previous people who said, would Mississippi Mills increase the funding? That's a tough one because they have 4 museums, which is rather a heavy load for a municipality that has no industry, by the way, no, not like Cart Place or anything like that. So it seems to need a bigger supporter, or a bigger group, or something with more financial clout. But I know so many people would be very sorry to see that whole thing taken away from its very special location. Anyway, that's my position.
Thank you very much, Val. So I'll attempt to answer the question and your 2 questions. So in terms of, would MVCA consider transferring ownership of the entirety of the property, if I understood you correctly, to a higher level of government for the purpose of raising the overall profile of that museum and potentially providing for co-housing of other museum collections? Is that an accurate, oops, sorry, I'll have to unmute you there. Or could you unmute yourself? I'm starting to think to.
I can do it.
There you go.
So yeah, I guess I wasn't thinking about bringing the other museums in because for me, if it was made to a high level and made into say a provincial park or something, then the park becomes as important as the museum. And what we've just seen, particularly in the current time with COVID, is that people want to see things, but they also need to be outdoors.
Right.
And
so on
yeah.
that, we've absolutely seen that at our site. Like that site, all of our conservation areas saw such a huge surge in attendance last year. And already this spring, we're seeing the numbers starting to go and we're having to open washroom facilities earlier, you know, everything. We're having to deal with parking, all the sorts of challenges you get when you have more than average number of people at a site. So from our perspective, I won't call it a silver lining, but you know, one of the things COVID has done has made people seek out other locations. And so all of a sudden, areas that people, you know, didn't know about have been promoted. So yes, the 7 Wonders of Lanark includes the Kintail site, and lots of people are coming here. So, so I think, you know, people who, when we looked at the records of just general attendance at the site versus museum attendance, certainly some people came to the site apparently to go to the museum. But the vast majority of people come to the site to attend the site for that outdoor experience. So I guess coming back to your question about, you know, the provincial park scenario, quite frankly, it's an interesting idea, Val. It hasn't been considered at all. The upper levels of government that we've talked to certainly haven't expressed interest in that. And the board hasn't offered that up. I mean, it's just not something that the board has even discussed. Since you've raised it, I think it's something that, you know, we need to acknowledge as a possibility. And I really can't speak for the board about how we would feel as an organization giving up one of the 7 wonders of the Lanark County. And it is our largest, you know, conservation area and the gem in our portfolio, right? So, but I appreciate you raising it as something that needs to be given consideration. And I don't discount what you've been saying in terms of, obviously, sites that are owned and operated at a provincial level tend to, but not universally, get that much more funding and support than, you know, and so on up the ladder. I think though, and I don't know whether Paul is still on the line though, but Shannon, is Paul still on the line? Because I'm just wondering, we have on our special advisory committee somebody who is with the Museums Council of Ontario, or whatever the proper name was, and I apologize that I didn't.
Yeah, Paul Robertson is still on the line.
So Paul, I don't know if you want to comment on relative funding to different, you know, museums operated and maintained at different levels of government, and are they all seeing this crunch just in relative terms? Are you able to unmute, Paul?
Yeah, I've unmuted. Thanks, Sally. Museum funding is a funny thing in this province. As we know, the majority of museums are small nonprofit, many run by municipalities, so they fall under municipal jurisdiction. The province only runs a handful of its own museums, and then of course the province also includes federal level museums. But in the only consistent, well, it's not even consistent, but the one provincial funding model, the Community Museums Operating Grant, CMOG for short, is the only funding model that exists for museums across the board. And of the approximately 700 museums in Ontario now, only about 166 actually receive that funding. So the Kintail is actually one of the fortunate ones. It's been a point of discussion, shall we say, on the part of the Ontario Museum Association and the province for some time. As yet, we haven't move too much further on that, but it's certainly an issue that's there. So very much responsibility is certainly put back on at the local level. And I know that some of the conversation that's happened this evening is well placed when people have asked what can the local municipality do, what can the county do. Those are all points, reasonable points of discussion. And in this is, well, we perhaps blame everything on pandemic. Some of these issues existed before, but absolutely something to consider. There are various ways to look at and funding models, but it also means that as modern museums, we've got to be creative in how we work with each other. And I think certainly in the province of Ontario, under the aegis of the Ontario Museum Association, we've been very much promoting our regional networks. So these are groupings by region of various local museums. And there is a network, as I understand it, which is in the beginning stages in your area. And it's very much, where can museums work together? The marketing question, that's oftentimes something that can be picked up by that local network. Questions about funding, even though the governing bodies may be different for every member, it's the collaboration, which is the big thing. So I don't know if I have a specific answer to the question in the way you might want to hear it, but there are possibilities. There are also limitations, and that's certainly what we're still trying to work through.
Actually, Paul, I do have a supplemental question for you, if I may. So I think about Algonquin Park, and they have a phenomenal museum there. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure, but I know that any number of provincial parks may have these sort of museum elements. Are you involved with them at all? Are they part of your association? And do you have any sense of the degree to which they're funded and supported?
I wish I had a specific answer to your question. I know of that museum. It's been, I know, around for a very long time. It's part of the park, so my understanding is it's run by the park, which is provincial.
Yeah.
It's probably a member of the OMA, but to be honest with you, I'm not actually quite sure.
Right.
I'm not sure of its specific status, so I can't unfortunately comment on that one.
Provincial
whether or
parks
not it would be equivalent to the Mill of Kintail, that's a good question. I'm not sure. It's not one of the major provincial museums, but it likely, if it's part of the provincial park, it would fall under a park budget.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Paul.
You're welcome.
I'm going to go back to the chat line here because I know that some more questions have come in. So is there still an Ontario Canadian Museums Association working on this lobbying? Well, actually, Paul, do you have a comment on that? Do you know whether there was any sort of concerted lobbying of the province on Bill 108? If you could unmute.
Well, I think part of it being a representative on the advisory committee was one way that we could help at a very specific level. This has come up at the OMA table. I don't believe the CMA, Canadian Museum Association, is working on this specific issue because it's very much a provincial one, dealing, of course, museums fall under one ministry, conservation authorities fall under another, so it's that conversation back and forth. We have brought this up with the ministry, the OMA has, and that, trying to promote through budgets, hoping that some of the original proposals might be rescinded, as we saw in the last budget. Bill 108 was confirmed. So it's more just keeping the dialogue open and working as best we can with the individual sites, because as came up earlier in the conversation tonight, different sites are handling it differently, specific to their own needs.
Okay, super. Thank you for that, Paul.
You're welcome.
So the next question, shortly after the announcement from the Ford government about requiring the CAs to focus on core mandate, Doug Ford was asked specifically about Black Creek Pioneer Village, and he said that he did not intend for the site to be negatively impacted and that it would continue. So lobbying does seem to be a approach. I will tell you, and maybe actually Shannon, you can, we've tried to reach out and find out more details about that. Maybe Shannon, you can explain where our queries on that stand right now?
Yeah, so Toronto Region Conservation Authority oversees Black Creek Pioneer Village, and Toronto Region TRCA is the largest conservation authority in the province. So I'm making headway with trying to get a direct answer from them. Just I can appreciate how busy they are. So I'm still waiting for that answer, but I can gladly share that once I get that from them.
Right. The other point I'd like to add is that, as I've mentioned, we're still waiting for the regs, and there's the distinct possibility that the regulations may speak specifically to that site. And that's why, you know, there may be an opportunity for this particular site of national, regional significance to also have an exemption. But this is where, speaking candidly, the community needs to make that effort because the province has heard loud and clear from the conservation authorities and repeatedly on this issue. They may not have heard from the broader community on this. And so this is where I'm saying there may yet be an opportunity for everybody on this call who feels passionately about this issue to engage with local MPPs and the provincial ministries and the Premier's office and say that regulation needs to have an exemption for this site. So there's still this window of opportunity. I just don't know how effective that would be, but nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? So I just put that out there as something that the community members may want to pursue. I'm very new to this conversation, but wondering if there were any thoughts or feeling today as to how many of the 11 municipalities might provide support. I don't know. And I haven't posed that question yet. And I think we'll pose that question only when we have to, because there's absolutely no purpose to be gained right now in asking that question prematurely. So we're going to hold off asking that question until we need to. Do you intend to contact existing museums in Mississippi Mills to assess their support for option 1? So this is something Shannon and I and others have been talking about. How do we approach this next stage? What we will in all likely be doing is something that along the lines of requesting people for an expression of interest, that they need to come to us and formally express interest in the collection, in operating and maintaining the museum, and demonstrate their wherewithal to do so. And so to the extent that we get responses from those organizations, then we would pursue formal conversations with them, because right now everything is very conversational. There's nothing concrete. And we're at the point now where, as I said, we need to, get down to brass tacks and figure out what's real, what we can work with, and make it happen. And exhaust an opportunity. And then if it comes to fruition, wonderful. And if it doesn't, we need to move on to the next option. So, but that's more or less how I sort of see the process going from this point forward. It says the Kintail appears to be within the MCC region. Have there been any discussions with, or are there plans to have discussions with the MCC? And the answer is yes, we do intend to reach out to the MCC. The MCC is a much smaller organization than it was when it was established in terms of its own organizational capacity and its the scope of things it does in-house versus contracting out. But absolutely, we're going to be reaching out to the MCC on this. So we have a comment here. Lisa McLeod was very interested at the outset of the advisory committee meeting. She might handle a plea to the province. Yes. And I know that conversations have happened with her previously, and so strongly encourage people to reach out to her today. Absolutely. Shannon, do you see any hands up?
I don't. No, there's no hands up.
Okay, well, we're coming up to 8:30. And as Shannon said, we're more than happy to take any sort of questions or comments or suggestions in the coming days. Shannon, maybe do you want to just pull up your final slide there again so people can jot down your particulars?
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen here. So it's S Gutowski, S-G-U-T as in Tom, O-S as in Sam, K-I-E at mvc.on.ca.
So, and we're receiving comments till May 7. And then we're going to be pursuing these options and testing them as we've discussed here this evening. So, Shannon, do you have any final comments or the like?
No, I just want to thank everybody for their time this evening. You know, this definitely is a cause very near and dear to many of you, and I just appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us your feedback. And again, don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be more than happy to speak with you further about this.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.